They called her unqualified, said she had no place working on the Apache's heavy weaponry. Three arrogant recruits stood back smirking as the female maintenance tech struggled with a jammed machine gun. None of them knew her past. None of them recognized what those skilled hands had done in combat. But one person did. The moment the squadron pilot walked in, everything changed. What happened next silenced a room full of doubters and became the military video that millions couldn't stop sharing. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story of hidden strength resonates with you, consider subscribing for more untold stories of remarkable people who never asked for recognition. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the maintenance bay as Technical Sergeant Revna Caldwell methodically broke down an M230 chain gun removed from an H-64D Apache. Her movements were economical and practiced, hands moving with the quiet precision that came from years of experience. The massive weapon system lay partially disassembled on the workbench before her, its components arranged in perfect order. At 34, Revna had the composed demeanor of someone who had seen far more than her service record suggested. Her calloused hands never hesitated as they moved across the intricate machinery, finding each pin and spring with practiced ease. The maintenance bay was nearly empty at 0600 hours, just as she preferred it. The solitude allowed her to focus entirely on the task at hand, without distractions or unnecessary conversation. The heavy metal door to the maintenance bay swung open with a creak that echoed through the cavernous space. Three young airmen entered, coffee cups in hand, their faces bright with the eagerness of new recruits assigned to observe morning maintenance procedures. Airman Frost led the group, a loudmouthed 22-year-old with a swagger that hadn't yet been tempered by experience. Behind him followed Airman Zephyr, 24 and quick to laugh at others' jokes, and Airman Thackeray, a perpetually smirking 23-year-old who seemed convinced of his own superiority. Frost spotted Revna working alone on the Apache's weapons system. He nudged the others, whispering something that made them snicker. They approached, keeping what they considered a safe distance, as if merely observing the maintenance procedure they'd been assigned to study. "They'll let anyone turn wrenches these days," Frost said, his voice pitched just loud enough to be audible across the bay. Zephyr laughed. "My sister couldn't even lift that feed tray." $10 says she calls for help in 5 minutes, Thackeray added, smirking as he sipped his coffee. Revna remained focused on her work, her face betraying nothing, as she encountered a severely jammed round in the firing mechanism. The weapon had been tagged with a bright red card reading, "Dangerous misfire, priority repair," marking it as an urgent safety issue that needed resolution before the day's scheduled flights. She methodically began a complex disassembly procedure that wasn't found in the standard maintenance manual, her fingers moving with the surety of someone who understood the weapon on an intuitive level. A senior maintenance chief passed through the bay, his experienced eyes immediately noting the recruits standing idle instead of actively learning. He approached them with a stern expression. "If you three have time to spectate, you have time to work," he barked. "Gun barrels on the far wall need cleaning. Get to it." The recruits reluctantly moved to the assigned task, but not before the chief stopped briefly beside Revna. He leaned in and whispered something that caused her to nod slightly, her eyes never leaving her work. The exchange was brief, almost imperceptible, but it didn't escape the notice of the recruits. From across the bay, the three airmen continued their commentary, now more performative than before, ensuring others who had begun to filter into the maintenance area could hear their mockery. "Bet she got assigned here because they needed to fill a quota," Frost said, his voice carrying in the open space. "Wonder who she knew to get this assignment," added Thackeray. Zephyr laughed a little too loudly. "Probably couldn't handle a desk job either." Master Sergeant Bryson entered the maintenance bay, his crew cut and ramrod posture marking him as career military long before anyone saw his rank. He walked with a slight limp, a souvenir from years of service that younger airmen had learned not to mention. The recruits immediately straightened up in his presence, their laughter dying away into respectful silence. Bryson didn't acknowledge them. Instead, he walked directly to where Revna worked, stopping several paces away to watch her silently, his expression unreadable. He noted the way her hands moved across the weapon system, the methodical precision with which she addressed the jam. His eyes narrowed slightly when she employed a technique that wasn't taught in basic training, but he said nothing, simply observing as she worked. 2 hours passed. The maintenance bay had filled with more personnel preparing for the day's operations. Mechanics performed routine checks on various aircraft components. Ground crews prepared for the day's flights, and pilots began arriving for their pre-mission briefings. The energy in the bay had shifted from the quiet of early morning to the bustling activity of a fully operational military facility. The Apache's pilot, Major Alaric Warden, entered the bay with purposeful strides, his weathered face set in lines of concentration. At 40, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had faced death and returned to tell the tale. Beside him walked his co-pilot, Captain Indara Powell, a 35-year-old officer whose observant eyes missed nothing as they swept across the maintenance area. They had arrived for the pre-flight inspection, and Alaric immediately noticed Revna still working on the weapon system that should have been ready hours ago. His brow furrowed with concern. This was his aircraft scheduled for a critical training mission in 3 hours, and delays in maintenance could impact the entire day's operations. The recruits, now polishing equipment nearby after finishing their assigned task, exchanged knowing glances. They expected the pilot to dress down the female technician for the delay, vindicating their earlier mockery. Frost nudged Thackeray, nodding toward the approaching officers with anticipation. Alaric approached Revna with a neutral expression, standing at a respectful distance from her workspace. "Status report, Sergeant," he said, his voice carrying the natural authority of command. Revna responded without looking up, her hands never pausing their work on the delicate feed mechanism. "3 more minutes, sir," she said simply, her focus unwavering. A small crowd had begun to gather around the workspace, drawn by the unusual delay on the squadron's lead aircraft and the presence of the senior pilot. Mechanics, pilots, and ground crew formed a loose circle, their curiosity piqued by the tension in the air. Master Sergeant Bryson stood apart from the group, watching intently as Revna continued her work. When her fingers traced a particular pattern on the feed mechanism, his eyes narrowed with a flash of recognition, as if seeing something familiar in her technique. The crowd grew restless as minutes ticked by. The recruits had positioned themselves where they could observe without being obvious, their earlier bravado somewhat dimmed in the presence of senior officers, but still evident in their exchanged glances. Frost leaned toward his companions, whispering loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "This is what happens when you force diversity where it doesn't belong." Several heads turned in his direction, but before anyone could respond, a loud metallic clank echoed through the bay as the gun's mechanism suddenly released. The sound drew all eyes back to Revna as she carefully extracted a deformed round and a piece of foreign debris that had caused the jam. Without pausing for acknowledgement, she immediately began reassembling the weapon system with remarkable speed, her hands moving with even greater confidence now that the obstruction had been cleared. Major Alaric stepped closer, his expert eyes assessing her work. His expression shifted subtly as he watched her fingers implement a modification to the feed mechanism that wasn't in any standard maintenance protocol. He froze mid-step, staring at the distinctive technique she used to prevent future jams. "Where did you learn that technique, Sergeant?" he asked, his voice carrying across the now silent bay. For the first time since the recruits had entered the maintenance bay hours earlier, Revna looked up from her work, meeting the pilot's gaze directly. In that moment, something passed between them, a flash of recognition that transcended rank and present circumstances. "Kandahar, sir," she answered simply. 2018. The Major's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, but enough for those watching closely to notice the change. Recognition dawned on his face, followed quickly by a complex mix of emotions too nuanced for most observers to interpret. The maintenance bay had fallen completely silent. Every person present sensed they were witnessing something significant, though few understood what. The 3 recruits exchanged confused glances, their earlier mockery forgotten in the sudden tension that filled the space. Captain Powell stood slightly behind her pilot, her sharp eyes darting between Revna and Alaric, picking up on the unspoken communication between them. Major Alaric turned slowly to face the gathered crowd, including the recruits who had spent the morning ridiculing the very person he now regarded with unmistakable respect. "Attention!" he commanded, his voice echoing against the metal walls of the maintenance bay. Everyone present snapped to attention, responding automatically to the authority in his voice. Even civilian contractors straightened their posture, sensing the gravity of the moment. Alaric surveyed the room, his gaze lingering briefly on the 3 recruits before returning to Revna, who had risen from her workstation and now stood at perfect attention, her eyes fixed forward. The silence stretched for several heartbeats, heavy with anticipation. Something was about to change, though none of the observers yet knew what. In the morning light, streaming through the high windows of the maintenance bay, dust motes danced around the assembled personnel, the scene frozen in a moment that seemed balanced on the edge of revelation. Major Alaric's voice cut through the silence of the maintenance bay. Some of you may be wondering why Technical Sergeant Caldwell is working on this Apache instead of a weapons specialist. What you're witnessing is the reason 3 squads of Rangers came home alive from Operation Deadfall. The statement hung in the air, heavy with implication. Several of the senior mechanics exchanged glances, the name of the classified operation clearly familiar to them. Alaric turned back to Revna. You were Dust Devil 2, weren't you? Weapons officer on Thunder 6. The bay remained absolutely silent. Captain Powell's eyes widened in recognition of the call sign, her posture straightening even further as the significance of the revelation dawned on her. Revna maintained her perfect attention stance, eyes forward, betraying nothing. Yes, sir. The file said you were reassigned after recovery, Alaric continued, his voice now carrying a note of respect that hadn't been there before. I never knew where. Master Sergeant Bryson stepped forward, his slight limp more pronounced as he moved to stand beside Revna. Her combat record is still classified, Major, as are the details of her injuries. Alaric nodded, understanding. The boundaries being established, then addressed the bay again. What I can tell you is that the woman you've been watching struggle with this weapon system has fired it in combat more times than anyone else in this building. The modification she just made saved my life once. He faced Revna directly and rendered a formal salute, a gesture rarely offered from an officer to an enlisted member. It's an honor to fly your bird, Sergeant Caldwell. Revna returned the salute crisply, her face still composed but something shifting in her eyes, a brief flash of the person she had once been. The officer she might have remained. Behind them, Captain Powell had quietly raised her phone, having captured the entire exchange. Her thumb hovered over the share button, hesitating for just a moment before tapping the screen. The moment was too important not to document, too powerful not to share. The crowd began to disperse, mechanics returning to their stations, pilots moving toward their briefings. But the atmosphere had irrevocably changed. Glances toward Revna now carried respect instead of dismissal. Conversations hushed as people passed her workstation. The earlier mockery replaced with curiosity and reappraisal. The 3 recruits stood frozen, their earlier bravado evaporated in the face of what they had just witnessed. Frost looked particularly stricken, the reality of his misjudgment written clearly across his features. Major Alaric completed his inspection of the weapons system with meticulous attention, now treating it with the reverence of something precious. Perfect work as always, Sergeant, he said finally, loud enough for those nearby to hear. The bird will fly in 2 hours. Will you be on the field for takeoff? If my duties permit, sir, Revna replied, already beginning to clean her workspace with the same precision she had applied to the repair. I'll make sure they do, Bryson interjected, giving Revna a rare nod of approval before turning to leave. The maintenance bay gradually returned to its normal rhythm, the extraordinary moment folding back into the routine of military life. But something fundamental had shifted, like tectonic plates moving beneath the surface, imperceptible except in its effects. Conversations across the bay now included glances toward Revna. Veterans nodded to her as they passed. Younger airmen regarded her with new curiosity. Revna herself seemed unchanged, continuing her work with the same quiet focus. Seemingly oblivious to the altered perceptions around her, she completed her task, submitted her maintenance report, and gathered her tools with methodical care. 3 hours later, Revna stood on the flight line, clipboard in hand as she performed final systems checks before the Apache's scheduled departure. The afternoon sun beat down on the tarmac, heat waves rising from the surface as ground crews prepared for takeoff. Other helicopters sat in formation nearby, their crews performing similar pre-flight procedures. Major Alaric and Captain Powell approached their aircraft, both now in full flight gear. Alaric paused beside Revna, reviewing her final notes with careful attention. Everything's green, sir, she reported. The targeting system has been recalibrated to compensate for the feed adjustment. Alaric nodded, then lowered his voice. You know, There's been talk about revising the medical restrictions for former flight crew. The standards have changed since your evaluation. Revna's expression remained neutral. I'm where I need to be, sir. Alaric studied her for a moment, then nodded once. We fly better, knowing you're the one keeping us in the air, Sergeant. He climbed into the cockpit, Captain Powell already settling into her position. The pre-flight sequence began, rotors slowly beginning their rotation as systems came online. Revna stepped back to a safe distance, watching with a complex expression, pride mixed with unmistakable longing. The Apache lifted off for its training mission, weapons systems fully operational. Revna watched until it became a distant speck against the clear sky, her hand unconsciously rising to shield her eyes from the sun, in a gesture reminiscent of countless other takeoffs she had witnessed from a different vantage point. As she turned to leave the flight line, she found the 3 recruits approaching cautiously. They had clearly been waiting for this moment, standing at a respectful distance until the aircraft departed. Frost, visibly humbled, stepped forward first. Sergeant Caldwell, we wanted to apologize for our behavior this morning. We had no idea who you were or what you'd done. Save it, she interrupted, her voice firm but not unkind. I don't need your apology. What I need is for you to understand something. In this job, arrogance kills, not just careers, people. The 3 recruits absorbed this, properly chastened. Revna turned to leave, but Airman Thackeray stepped forward, his earlier smirk replaced with genuine interest. Would you teach us that modification you made? The one that prevents the jam? Revna paused, considering the request with careful thought. The same hands that had been mocked hours earlier were now being recognized as sources of valuable knowledge. The reversal was not lost on her. Tomorrow, she said finally. 0500. Yes, Sergeant, all 3 responded in unison. Their earlier disrespect completely vanished. Revna watched them leave, then turned her attention back to the sky, where the Apache was now a barely visible dot on the horizon. For just a moment, something shifted in her composed expression. A flash of the person she had been before, the pilot she might have remained if circumstances had been different. By evening, the video Captain Powell had captured had begun its journey across military social media channels. The silent, dedicated maintenance sergeant recognized and saluted by a combat pilot resonated deeply with service members across branches. Comments and shares multiplied as the hours passed, the story spreading from military channels to broader platforms. This is what respect looks like, read one comment with thousands of likes. Watch how quickly their attitude changes when they learn who she really is, said another. The video moved beyond military circles, picked up by news outlets and civilian platforms fascinated by the glimpse into military culture and the powerful moment of recognition. By morning, what had been a simple interaction in a maintenance bay had become a viral phenomenon, sparking conversations about recognition, respect, and hidden expertise. Colonel Harlow's aide placed the tablet on his desk. Precisely at 0800 the next morning, the viral video queued up and ready for viewing. The base commander watched it without comment, his expression giving away nothing as he observed the moment that had captured the nation's attention. 3 million views overnight, sir, the aide reported. Pentagon's Public Affairs Office has called twice already. Harlow nodded dismissively, sending the aide from the room with a gesture. He picked up his secure phone and dialed a number from memory, waiting several moments before a voice answered on the other end. It's Harlow, he said simply. You've seen the video? Yes, that's her. I understand the sensitivity, but this changes things. Her record needs to be reviewed. He listened for several minutes, occasionally nodding. I'll have her in my office within the hour. Revna arrived at the base commander's office at precisely 900, her uniform impeccable, posture perfect as she stood at attention before Colonel Harlow's desk. The tablet showing the viral video sat between them, the screen now dark but its implications filling the space between officer and enlisted. The Pentagon called, Harlow said. Twice. Revna remained silent, waiting for the commander to continue. 3 years ago, when they grounded you after the crash, I was ordered to keep you away from the Apaches, to give you a desk job. He paused, studying her impassive face. You requested maintenance instead. Yes, sir. Why didn't you tell anyone who you were? Revna finally spoke, her voice carrying quiet intensity. With all due respect, sir, they never asked. The simplicity of the statement hung in the air between them. Harlow leaned back in his chair, reassessing the woman before him. seeing beyond the maintenance sergeant to the combat officer she had once been. He slid a folder across the desk, its red border indicating classified contents. Flight Medical Board has reviewed your case. They're willing to reconsider your status. Whatever happened on that classified mission, it seems Washington is finally ready to acknowledge it. Revna's eyes dropped to the folder, the first break in her perfect attention stance since entering the office. Her hand hovered over it for a moment before she picked it up, feeling the weight of the opportunity it represented. This doesn't guarantee reinstatement to flight status, Harlow cautioned, but it opens the door that was slammed shut 3 years ago. I understand, sir. Harlow nodded, then gestured to the tablet. That video has changed the equation. Public opinion can be a powerful force, even within the military. Use it wisely. Revna tucked the folder under her arm, her composure regained. Permission to return to duty, sir? I have a class to teach at 0500 tomorrow. The recruits? Yes, sir. They asked to learn the feed modification. A rare smile crossed Harlow's face. Dismissed, Sergeant. And Caldwell, whatever happens with that medical review, you've already earned your wings twice over. Revna saluted and turned to leave, her steps lighter than they had been in 3 years, the classified folder under her arm, representing a future she had thought forever closed to her. Outside, the sound of Apache rotors filled the air as the morning patrols took flight, a sound that had once been the rhythm of her life and might be again. The maintenance bay was silent at 0455, illuminated only by the overhead work lights that cast long shadows across the concrete floor. Revna arrived 5 minutes early, laying out the components of the M230 chain gun in perfect order on the workbench. She moved with purposeful efficiency, her mind still processing the meeting with Colonel Harlow and the classified folder now securely stored in her quarters. She had spent hours reviewing the medical board's preliminary findings, their clinical language outlining the possibility of returning to flight status if she passed a series of evaluations. The crash that had grounded her had left physical scars that had healed, but the psychological evaluation would be more challenging. The events of Operation Deadfall remained heavily classified, her role in the mission known only to a select few with the highest clearance levels. At precisely 0500, the door to the maintenance bay opened. Revna looked up, expecting to see the 3 recruits from the previous day. Instead, she found 12 young airmen and women filing in quietly, Frost, Zephyr, and Thackeray at the front of the group. They lined up with military precision in front of her workbench, standing at attention without being ordered to do so. At ease, Revna said, momentarily taken aback by the unexpected turnout. I was only expecting 3 of you. Frost stepped forward. Word spread, Sergeant. Everyone wanted to learn from you. Revna surveyed the group, noting the mix of experience levels and specialties represented. Some were maintenance crews she recognized, others were from different departments entirely. All looked eager to learn, their earlier attitudes replaced with genuine respect. Very well, she said, gesturing them closer to the workbench. Gather around. This isn't in any manual, so watch carefully. For the next hour, Revna demonstrated the modification to the Apache's weapon system, explaining each step with clear, concise instructions. Her students watched with rapt attention, asking thoughtful questions and taking notes. She showed them how a slight adjustment to the feed mechanism could prevent the type of jam she had cleared the previous day, a modification she had developed in the field when standard procedures had failed during a critical moment in combat. This came from necessity, she explained, her hands moving with practiced precision across the weapon components. When you're 5,000 feet up with hostiles on the ground and your gun jams, you find solutions quickly or people die. The recruits absorbed every word, their expressions serious as they grasped the real-world implications of the technical knowledge she shared. When she finished the demonstration, she had each of them perform the modification under her supervision, correcting their technique with patient guidance. Sergeant Caldwell, one of the younger airmen, asked as they worked, "Is it true you were a weapons officer on an Apache?" Revna paused, considering her answer carefully. "I served where I was needed," she said finally, "just like I do now." The answer seemed to satisfy them, their respect for her evident in how attentively they followed her instructions. By 0700, as the rest of the base was coming to life, her impromptu class had mastered the basic technique, their hands becoming more confident with each repetition. "You've all done well," Revna told them, as they prepared to leave for their regular duties. Remember, this isn't about showing off what you know. It's about keeping our pilots safe and our aircraft operational. They nodded in understanding, filing out of the maintenance bay with a new sense of purpose. Frost lingered behind, clearly wanting to say something more. "Sergeant, I just wanted to say again how sorry I am for yesterday," he began. Revna shook her head. "The best apology is change behavior, Airman. I've seen that today. Now move on and be better." He nodded gratefully and left, leaving Revna alone in the maintenance bay. She began cleaning up the workstation with the same methodical care she applied to all tasks, her mind already shifting to the day's scheduled maintenance duties. The door opened again, and Master Sergeant Bryson entered, his limp more pronounced in the early morning hours. "Quite the class you had here, Sergeant," he observed, glancing at the neatly arranged tools. "Just sharing some field knowledge, sir." Bryson nodded, then produced a tablet from under his arm. "Your video passed 5 million views overnight. Pentagon's issued a statement." He handed her the tablet, open to the Defense Department's official social media page. The statement was brief, acknowledging the demonstration of expertise and professional recognition captured in the viral video, without mentioning specifics of Revna's service record or the classified operation. "They're controlling the narrative," Bryson explained. "Public Affairs is arranging interviews with Major Alaric. They want to focus on the recognition aspect, the importance of respect in the ranks. Nothing about deadfall or your medical status." Revna handed the tablet back. "That's appropriate, sir." "Is it?" Bryson asked, studying her with shrewd eyes. 3 years, Caldwell. 3 years of silence about what happened out there. Maybe it's time the real story came out. "That's not my call to make, Sergeant." Bryson accepted this with a grudging nod. "Colonel Harlow mentioned your medical review. For what it's worth, I think you belong back in the air. The work you've done here has been exemplary, but we both know where your real talents lie." Coming from Bryson, the praise carried significant weight. He had been skeptical when she first arrived in his maintenance division, a former weapons officer with no formal mechanical training assigned to his team. He had tested her rigorously, assigning her the most challenging tasks to prove her worth. She had met every challenge without complaint, earning his respect through competence rather than her combat record. "Thank you, sir," she said simply. "Report to the flight line at 1300, he told her. "You're assigned to Major Alaric's Apache for the afternoon check flight. He specifically requested you." Revna looked up in surprise. "Sir, just a standard maintenance verification flight after the weapons system work," Bryson explained, though there was something in his expression that suggested more. "Colonel's orders." Throughout the morning, Revna felt a growing sense of anticipation as she completed her regular maintenance tasks. The classified folder from Colonel Harlow remained at the forefront of her mind, its contents representing a possibility she had forced herself to stop hoping for years ago. The medical review would be thorough, the psychological evaluation particularly demanding, given the classified nature of the incident that had grounded her. At precisely 1300, she reported to the flight line where Major Alaric's Apache sat ready for its check flight. The afternoon sun glinted off the helicopter's sleek exterior as ground crews performed their pre-flight procedures. Captain Powell was notably absent, her usual place in the cockpit empty. Major Alaric approached, flight helmet under his arm. "Sergeant Caldwell, right on time. How's our bird looking?" "All systems green, sir," Revna reported, handing him the maintenance log she had meticulously completed. "The weapons system modifications have been documented and approved by Master Sergeant Bryson." Alaric reviewed the log, then gestured toward the Apache. "I need an experienced eye in the second seat for this check flight. Captain Powell has been called to a briefing. Would you care to join me?" The invitation struck Revna speechless for a moment. It had been 3 years since she had been in an Apache cockpit. 3 years since she had felt the vibration of the rotors through the controls, experienced the precision and power of the aircraft she had once commanded. "Sir, I'm not cleared for flight duty," she managed finally. Alaric smiled. "Actually, you are. For this flight only, Colonel Harlow has granted a temporary reinstatement to assess the weapons system modifications in action. Purely for maintenance verification purposes, of course." He handed her a flight authorization with Colonel Harlow's signature clearly visible at the bottom. Revna took it with hands that betrayed the slightest tremor, reading the document twice to confirm it was real. "Unless you'd prefer to stay on the ground," Alaric added, though his knowing expression made it clear he already knew her answer. 20 minutes later, Revna sat in the weapons officer position of the Apache, the familiar controls under her hands, the helmet's display lighting up her vision with targeting data and flight information. The sensation was overwhelming, a rush of muscle memory and emotion she had suppressed for 3 years, flooding back as the aircraft's systems came online. "How does it feel, Dust Devil?" Alaric asked through the intercom, using her old call sign with deliberate significance. "Like coming home, sir," she answered honestly, running through the pre-flight checks with a practiced ease that no amount of time on the ground could erase. The Apache lifted off, rising smoothly into the clear afternoon sky. Revna felt the familiar pressure in her chest, the slight disorientation as the ground fell away beneath them. They climbed to 3,000 feet, the base spreading out below them, a patchwork of buildings, runways, and training areas. "Taking her up to 5,000 for weapons system check," Alaric informed her, banking the helicopter gently toward the designated testing range. "You have control of the targeting systems." Revna activated the weapons console, the targeting reticle appearing in her display as the sensors came online. The M230 chain gun responded instantly to her commands, tracking smoothly as she acquired test targets on the range below. The modification she had implemented had not only cleared the jam but improved the weapon's response time, a difference that might seem minimal to others but could mean life or death in combat situations. "Sir, request permission to test fire sequence alpha," she said, falling back into protocols she had followed hundreds of times before. "Permission granted, Dust Devil. Show me what my bird can do." For the next 30 minutes, Revna put the Apache through a series of increasingly complex weapons tests, the aircraft responding to her commands with perfect precision. The modifications she had made to the firing system proved their worth repeatedly, the gun operating flawlessly through maneuvers that would have stressed an unmodified system to failure. As they completed the final test sequence, Alaric took the Apache into a sweeping turn that brought the base back into view. "Control, this is Thunder 6 returning from test flight. Weapons systems. Check complete, all modifications verified, effective. Roger, Thunder 6, you are cleared for landing." Revna felt a pang of regret as the Apache began its descent, knowing that once they touched down, her brief return to the sky would end. The medical review process would take weeks, possibly months, with no guarantee of reinstatement to flight status. This might be her only chance to fly again, a brief reminder of the life she had lost. "Sergeant Caldwell," Alaric said as they approached the landing zone, "whatever happens with your review, I want you to know that the finest weapons officer I ever flew with wasn't lost in that crash. She's been here all along, keeping us flying safely." "Thank you, sir," Revna replied, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. The Apache touched down precisely on its designated mark, rotors slowing as the engines powered down. Ground crew approached as Revna and Alaric completed shutdown procedures. When they finally removed their helmets and climbed from the cockpit, Revna noticed a small crowd had gathered nearby, including the recruits from her morning class, Master Sergeant Bryson, and Colonel Harlow himself. On the side of the Apache, freshly painted beneath the cockpit where Revna had sat, was a new call sign, "Dust Devil." Colonel Harlow stepped forward as Revna approached. "How did she handle, Sergeant?" "Perfectly, sir," Revna answered. "The modifications performed exactly as expected." Harlow nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "The Flight Medical Board has expedited your case. Initial reviews are promising. In the meantime, Major Alaric has requested you be assigned to his squadron as a weapons systems specialist, supervising maintenance while your flight status is determined." Revna stood straighter, unexpected hope rising within her. "I'd be honored, sir." "Good. Report to squadron operations at 0700 tomorrow. You'll be training maintenance crews on your modifications. The Pentagon wants them implemented across the Apache fleet." As Colonel Harlow departed, Revna turned to look at the Apache once more, its sleek form silhouetted against the afternoon sun, the fresh paint of her call sign clearly visible on its side. From ridiculed maintenance technician to recognized expert in less than 48 hours, her journey had come full circle. The recruits approached cautiously, led by Airman Frost. "Is it true you're going back to flight status, Sergeant?" "Nothing's certain yet," Revna answered honestly. "But every Apache needs someone who understands it inside and out, whether that's in the air or on the ground." They nodded in understanding, their expressions showing genuine admiration rather than the mockery of 2 days before. The transformation was as complete as her own, a reminder that respect, once earned, could change perspectives permanently. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the flight line, Revna remained by the Apache, her hand resting lightly on its armored skin. Whatever came next, whether returning to the sky or continuing to serve on the ground, she had found her place again. Not through demanding recognition or dwelling on past glory, but through quiet competence and unwavering dedication to her craft. The call sign gleamed in the fading light. Dust Devil, a name earned in combat, lost in tragedy, and reclaimed through perseverance. A reminder that true strength often lies hidden, revealed not through boasting, but through action. A lesson learned by those who had mocked her, and now a story spreading across the world, reminding everyone that respect is earned through what you do, not what you claim to be.